we'll be sharing with you more insights in terms of our integration toolset. We get a lot of questions around how does eBuilder manage integrations? You know, the reality is we have multiple options. We have some of you in the call that have gone through that experience, and your integrations are probably comprised of various methodologies. So we'll cover those as well. Number 3 is huge. Key considerations before and after integration. I'm going to say, you know, key considerations before are really important to me. Chris is probably going to say no after, right? But the point is, what we're trying to do here is work with every single customer that's considering moving forward with the integration and making sure they understand what are the basic requirements, what, you know, are the different stakeholders that need to be involved, what is the timing. There are a lot of questions that we can help you answer in a thoughtful manner. So we'll give you guys some insights as to what you can anticipate when working with the customer optimization team. Lucas will be sharing, you know, we'll always get the question too. What other systems have you integrated with Oracle? Have you integrated with SAP, whatever system? So we'll also share some of the most commonly integrated systems that we have in our portfolio with customers. And then last, and I think, you know, a key part of this whole conversation will be Chris covering, you know, what our integration process and deliverables look like. So that's going to help you if you're right now, whether you're going through an integration right now, whether you're starting to think about it, where you're about to sign, you know, a contract to move forward. These are key items that you need to be aware of that are going to help that process of delivering the integration a lot smoother. So before we go any further, Nick, if you'd be so kind, can we start the polling? We had a couple of questions for the group. And that first question, I think, is pretty straightforward. Like I said, we have customers on the call that have already done integration. We just wanted to get a sense for you guys as far as, you know, why you're here. So, Nick, how is that looking?
Good. We have, you know, do you currently have an integration with eBuilder? Yes, no, in progress. We got a couple polls here, so we'll give everybody about 15, 20 more seconds for this one. And then we'll jump to the next one.
We have a lot of yeses or in progress or.
Yeah, right now numbers are going up. We have about 50% are saying no. At this point, 33% yes, 20% in progress.
Huh, interesting.
So we'll close this one down, and we'll. That one was 33% yes, 47% no, and 19% in progress. And with that, we'll launch our next one.
Pretty straightforward. Yep. Are you planning on upgrading your ERP? And just while you're submitting your responses, by the way, if you know, I don't know if the ERP companies are doing a great job marketing or what it is, or there's a lot of upgrades, like with some of our customers that are moving, let's say, from Lawson to the next version, which is Infor. A lot of conversations around, hey, we've got an existing integration and we're going to have to redo it because we're upgrading or switching our financial system of record. So that's a little bit more background as to why we're asking this question.
Yeah, everything's pretty evenly split so far. We'll give another about 15 seconds on this one. Everything's in the 30s, about 33% all the way across the board. Right, we'll close that one out, and we've got one more for everybody.
Okay, and getting back to that first bullet point that I talked about earlier, helping build the business case. Again, this is very high level, but from your standpoint, what is the primary driver, or what was the primary driver for you guys to integrate your systems? And by the way, please, you know, I know we've got customers that have done integrations, not just with their financial system of record. We got integrations with space planning systems, with others out there. So based on your experience, if you could please share your thoughts as to what was a primary driver for you guys integrating your system.
Yeah, we're looking at about 60% for reduce, rework, connect workflows, and reliable data. Cost savings around 20%. A couple in the other category. We'll go another 5-10 seconds, and then we'll close it off. Well, awesome, everybody. Thank you for participating. About 60% across the board for reduce, rework, connect workflows, and reliable data. And those are our polls.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nick. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lucas Afalco. Lucas, are you okay with us getting questions from the questions from the audience as we go through your presentation?
Yeah, that's fine. We can certainly field questions as we go, but I want to make sure that we cover all of the material. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I want you to think of the rest of this presentation in this manner. Primarily, what I'm going to be covering for the next few minutes is what I would call the why, understanding the reasons why you integrate, why integrating in a certain way is important, and what options you have available to you. And then in the latter part of the presentation, Chris is going to cover focus a little bit more on the what. In other words, what are the critical goals and deliverables of an integration? What are the things that you need to be aware of coming into the process, and what does that process look like typically? So we should be able to cover most of the questions that you have as we go, and then if you have additional questions, we'll certainly have time at the end to answer those. So I want to begin by kind of talking about what the business case is. What are the factors in understanding why companies and why agencies and organizations integrate in the first place? And I want to think of it from the perspective of tracking costs versus managing costs. And this is mainly focusing on the financial integrations, but it can also be applicable to other aspects of project management as well. So I drew this distinction, and I hope everyone kind of understands what we mean by this. What we're talking about is, are you looking to just keep track of your projects, or are you looking to get out in front of your projects and manage the key decisions around project cost and other things such as schedule and other processes? So the reason why we make that distinction is, if you're just simply tracking those costs and you're just accounting for those costs, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to risks and other problems down the road with the project. So by allowing yourself to get out in front of your projects and manage things as they're happening and even before they happen, you're positioning yourself to be much more successful in the completion of your project. So understanding, being able to build a business case begins with understanding what your current processes are. Anyone who's been through an integration before, especially those on the call who are already integrated, understand what I'm talking about here. The first step is really nailing down what your current process is and making sure that you're not overlooking any key steps or bypassing any critical aspects to that process. So documenting and nailing down that process is the beginning. Once you start to nail down that process, you then are able to start talking about and identifying where the bottlenecks are in the process. And by bottlenecks can refer to a bunch of different things. It just doesn't mean that the process is slow at this particular point or this is causing a delay. It can refer to things such as duplicate data entry. It can refer to slow turnaround times on reviews and approvals. We could also be talking about steps within your process that require numerous revisions because people made mistakes and there wasn't really a logical barrier in place to validate that information. And one of the things I hear about most often is the amount of time that our clients have to spend reconciling eBuilder with either their financial system or in some cases a facility system or some other system, because there's so much data entry being done manually in both systems. It leaves you vulnerable to high rates of error, and that results in a lot of time spent reconciling those systems either at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, etc. So these are all things that can cause your process to slow down, or it can cause there to be data entry errors or other problems that eventually lead to project risks down the road. Another thing to take into consideration is when you're building your business case, are we talking about a new integration? In other words, this is the first time that you tried to integrate eBuilder with this particular system, or are we looking at a change to an existing integration? And Sergio mentioned at the top of the call, it's very common for our clients who are already integrated to be coming up on a change of financial systems or a major upgrade or some other significant change that impacts the integration. So understanding, what type of integration or what your current integration is versus whether it's a new integration is a key aspect to building that business case. So knowing what it takes in order to begin building a business case for your integration, one of the next questions that comes up is, what are some of the tools that are available to us for integration with eBuilder? And it helps to understand what your options are as you're building that business case, so that you know in advance, is this something that I'm going to simply be devoting a lot of time to, or is it going to require some budgeting of money and possible time allocation towards integrating eBuilder with the other system? So knowing the tools that are at your disposal or available to you through eBuilder is important in making that decision. There are 3 tools listed here. They're listed down the left-hand side. The first tool, just to highlight each one of them real quickly, is eBuilder's what I would call native import toolkit. In other words, these are built-in import tools that allow you to bring in data by way of what we call flat files. So typically Excel files or CSV, where you can bring in large amounts of data on an ad hoc basis. So in other words, you're not setting any kind of a schedule. You're just saying, hey, I want to bring in a group of invoices or a group of schedules or something like that from another system. And this may be a one-time thing, or it may be a few times, but I don't need to necessarily do this on a recurring basis or something that needs to be on a schedule. So the import toolkit is sort of your first line of defense, right? I also like, as a side note for folks on the call who are eBuilder administrators, I like to recommend using the import toolkit to get an understanding for what eBuilder typically can and cannot import. It gives you a sort of an introduction to that. It's not 100% in terms of what AppExchange, for example, is capable of doing, but it gives you a pretty good idea, and it can help set expectations as far as what's feasible through that tool and the other tools. Second one on the list here is eBuilder's API, which is a fully documented API. We have a link to the API documentation that we can provide to you if needed, but it allows you to be able to establish your own integration entry points out of eBuilder. In other words, you can be able to use the API to pull information in bulk out of eBuilder as needed. And it is something that is available to our customers. The last one on here, and this is probably the most common method of integration, is what we call AppExchange, which is our in-house supported integration platform. It is an integration platform as a service, and it allows us to build integrations and build and host integrations for our customers. So if you don't have the resources to, for example, write code and be able to call your own API, make your own API calls, or if necessary, or if you don't have the time resources to do your own imports through the toolkit, then we provide a platform on which we can schedule those integrations to run for you and be able to provide you with the support for those integration points. Lastly, the App Exchange platform is also our bidirectional integration platform of choice. So it allows you to, in most cases, push and pull information in and out of eBuilder. The benefits, just to highlight them very quickly, for the toolkit, it is like I said, it's part of the eBuilder based product. It allows you to fairly easily import data into eBuilder. You can use it at any time. No development is required. You don't have to be a software developer in order to import data into eBuilder. You have to have a pretty good understanding of Excel and sort of a basic understanding of data structures, but no advanced skills are required. The API, which I mentioned, is fully documented. It does give you the ability to self-manage some aspects of integrations. So it does reduce some of your dependency on Trimble in many respects. So if you've got the resources in-house to write API calls, then certainly it's something you'll want to look into as an option for future integrations. You can also self-manage a lot of your changes to your integration using the API. So, the message here is that both the import toolkit and the API give you an option where you can really control your total cost of ownership of that integration. The App Exchange platform focuses mainly on reducing the administrative overhead required to manage your integration. So if you don't have those software development resources, or if your administrator doesn't have the resources to manage their own imports manually, then this provides you with a low overhead option from an administrative standpoint. Also, the connectors that we're using in App Exchange are well tested. They're industry standard connectors. So what I mean by connectors are the APIs and the other aspects of connecting to other systems. So we're taking advantage of a lot of well-tested technology as part of our integration stack in order to facilitate those data connections for you. And of course, we host the integration on our servers, and that's another aspect to take into consideration when you're making a decision like this. Some considerations. We mentioned a little bit of this, excuse me, at the top of the hour before you begin to integrate. One of the most important things is to make sure that you've got involvement from your key stakeholders. So typically these can be obviously your construction leadership, number one, but it can also include leadership from finance, in some cases IT. There may be outside consultants who need to be involved in the conversation. So identifying who those people are, making sure that they understand what your goals are, and that you have good internal buy-in to the integration effort before you really proceed down the road of spinning up those resources into a project. I mentioned before, is this a new integration, or are we talking about an upgrade or a modification to an existing integration? So again, identifying what the nature of this integration is also important. You'll see on here where we talk about workshop. By workshop, what we mean is in some cases where there are complexities that are atypical, right, in terms of an integration, what we will recommend to our customer is, hey, before we sit down and we try to put a scope around what you need to do with your integration, let's have a detailed design session or design and discovery where we sit down and we document your requirements fully rather than just simply at a high level, and then come back with a recommended integration solution. So that is an option for some of our customers who have high levels of business complexity, or maybe regulatory issues that we need to be concerned with, or anything that might be a little outside of the norm. Testing is absolutely critical. Being prepared to test your integration when the time comes. So in other words, identifying if you have a test environment within your financial system or whatever system you're integrating with, knowing what that process is for testing. Do you need a test environment on the eBuilder side? So answering those questions before you begin to integrate is critical. And then lastly, any security requirements around integration, things like encryption or any additional security requirements in terms of how the data gets hosted or transferred. We want to, obviously know those up front as early as possible to make sure that we can deliver a solution that that is in compliance with those requirements. So before I proceed any further, I'm going to stop there. I guess, Sergio, do you want to see if we have any questions or any ones that we want to jump into real quick before we get into the common integrations?
I think we're good for right now, Lucas. The one thing that I did want to highlight in terms of what you stated earlier as far as internal resources, lining up those internal resources. We work with a lot of customers that the complexity here becomes the availability of those resources, correct? In terms of, hey, we've got number one, our SAP consultant is one group here. Our financial group is another group here. That's just wanted to highlight very specific examples, because that's where we run into challenges where a customer will tell us, hey, we've got a group of consultants that's only going to be available for the next 3 months. And if we don't get this done quickly, we're okay, then it's going to delay the project, creates a lot of, challenges, right? So just expanding on that thought to provide some specific examples. As far as the API itself, you mentioned, some of the differences there are customers in the call, for example, that are already using the API. And I appreciate you giving that nuance for this is a tool set that's available to you with these caveats, right? There's additional considerations, the resources that you have to have in place, the technical expertise, the maintenance aspect of it after the fact, right? As opposed to the, us leveraging our internal tool sets. So I was wondering if maybe you could expand on that just a little bit more.
Yeah, so the API is a RESTful API, so it allows you to connect and to download or pull information out of eBuilder. So it can be, it could mainly be eBuilder's processes. If you have, for example, processes by which you use to manage budget or commitment or invoice approvals, or even some of your non-cost integrated or like RFIs and submittals, you can pull out a lot of that information out of eBuilder. You can also pull information from some of the other modules and be able to download that into another system. So it gives you what I call the outbound side of integration, and the import toolkit gives you the inbound side. So you do get an aspect of bidirectionality using both tool sets. Obviously, AppExchange is probably the path of least resistance to a bidirectional integration, but it doesn't mean it's not feasible through other methods. So that is something that we have a link to our API documentation. It's developer.e-builder.net. We'll provide that to you guys as part of any follow-up to this meeting, but I encourage you to go out there and take a look at it. If you know anybody within your organization who does software development today, especially if they've coded API calls to other systems, I would certainly encourage you to redirect them to that website and allow them to review that and see if they have any questions.
One more quick question, Lucas. Does the import toolkit allow imports to multiple projects at once, or do you have to import one project at a time?
You can import to multiple projects at once. One of the columns that your import file is going to contain is what we call a project identifier. Typically, this is either a project number or just the project name, but some unique identifier for that project for each row in the file. So, for example, if you're bringing in a bunch of invoices that you want to be able to import into the cost module, then you would just simply add one more column for project name and you would be sure to include the project name for each invoice that you're going to be importing into the system. And the system, excuse me, the import toolkit, when you're running the import, will automatically post those invoices to the correct project.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, and I'm glad you pointed out the resource availability aspect. I'm sure Chris may have a story later on when he jumps in here as far as getting partway into an integration to find out that a key person's on vacation or something like that. So it's very important that as you're planning and even in the idea stage of your integration, that you begin making sure that those resources are going to be available when you think they're going to be needed. So certainly, if you have any questions about that and how to plan for an integration, be sure to contact your eBuilder account manager, and we can assist you with those questions. So the next topic I want to cover is common integrations, right? This is more or less to kind of give you an idea of where other organizations are integrating. So for those of you who do not have any integrations today, especially with eBuilder, this should start to get some of the thought process flowing around where you might want to integrate. Now, the focus you see here on the screen is obviously financial integrations. A good 85 to 90% of our integrations are financial. We're going to get into some of the other areas that you can integrate as well later on. But when we're talking about financial integrations, these are some of the common, what we call data objects that customers want to integrate. These are transactional. So one of the things you're going to want to think about, and I mentioned this early on, when I was talking about bottlenecks, one of the other things you're going to want to think about in your business case is what's the volume of these things. In other words, looking at comparing, say, budgets to invoices. When you think about those two things, which one do you think typically has more volume? Well, obviously it's going to be invoices, right? Every budget's going to have several to maybe hundreds of invoices. And so looking at the volume and comparing that to the actual the pain points that you're seeing with each of those data objects is very important to the business case. So these are things that these are data objects that a lot of our clients have integrated in various different ways over the years. A lot of it's been through App Exchange, but some of it has been through API, through Import Toolkit, and those methods. So keep that in mind as we proceed forward and we kind of talk about some of these things. And of course, as part of that, we are often called on to integrate with a lot of the very commonly used accounting systems that are out there. So these are some of the ones that we've had a chance to integrate with over the last 20, 25 years. And you can see some of these names. You might recognize your system on here. Now, if you don't see your system on here, that's perfectly fine. There's many other systems that are out there that all have APIs that we can connect to, or at a minimum, they can push and pull flat files of data. So as long as we can get some sort of a flat file or an API connection to that system, then our chance of integrating is pretty good. We also integrate with other systems as well, and what you see on here is some of the common areas that we integrate with. Asset and facilities management, for example, and a lot of times the integrations around those systems focus on work orders that become large projects, where hey, we decide this is no longer just a small facilities project, it's a large capital project. We need to put it in a system like eBuilder to manage it. So a lot of times those project requests will come out of a system like Maximo or Archibus, for example, and we will use that to create a project and a budget and other things in eBuilder that project's going to need. So asset and facilities management is another area that we've done integration work. And then there's just sort of a category I called other. These often include procurement systems, planning, capital planning. I sort of put ArcGIS by itself because that is an area that Trimble corporately has a large partnership with, and we have other solutions within our portfolio of software that integrate quite tightly with ArcGIS, and eBuilder as well is no exception. We have several clients who are integrated with Esri's platform. So if you're a big user of Esri and you want to be able to begin getting some of your eBuilder data into Esri for purposes of sharing and planning your projects, then certainly we can talk about that as well. And again, other basically can include any system that eBuilder data needs to be integrated with that has an API or can be flat.
I'm sorry, Lucas, we did have one question from what I think is a conference attendee that is asking, what about the CityWorks integration that we talked about at the dimensions?
Yeah, so that's a separate effort. We are working corporately and we're making a lot of progress to integrate our point solutions with each other. So eBuilder, CityWorks for asset management. We also have Agile Assets for our DOTs, Quadri, which is a bid-based solution, and other applications as well. There is a large R&D effort going on right now to tightly integrate all of those solutions. That type of integration is not something that would go through this process that we're describing here. It's going to be productized, so you'll be able to request that as part of your base software package. But yeah, that is a great question, and we can almost spend another hour just talking about that topic alone. And a few other things to consider post-integration. I think this might be the most important slide, at least from my perspective, for my part of the presentation, is understanding what to expect after you integrate. And one of the most important things to understand when you integrate two different systems that essentially speak two different languages, and I don't mean programming languages, I just mean accounting software speaks accounting, project management software speaks project management. There's some overlap between those things, but there are differences. And those differences in terms of functionality often result in what we call exceptions in the data. So in other words, when we're trying to push and pull information between two systems, there's going to be situations where a piece of information cannot be accepted into one or another system because of a certain reason. Either somebody made a data entry error, or there's a mismatch in what the other system is expecting in that particular data field. There could be the laundry list of exception reasons is as long as both of my arms. So the reasons that, or excuse me, the amount of exceptions that you're going to see after an integration is something to be prepared for. There is going to be a period of time where both systems essentially have to, what we call, burn in and get used to how each other functions. So those exceptions are going to happen. I can't tell you that, you know, the first time you fire off an integration, there's not going to be an exception. The most important thing to understand, or excuse me, the next thing to understand here is that whenever you do integrate two systems, you have to be vigilant about your change control with both systems. So for eBuilder, it means you know, don't be reckless in making changes in your processes, for example. Be considerate for the impact that those changes are going to have on your integration. For the other system that you may be integrating with, you may not have as much control over that, but at least be aware of when changes are coming as best you can, so that you can prepare for those changes. If you're managing the integration in-house using, like, for example, our API or our import tools, you know, be ready to make those changes when you need to. if it's something that we're hosting for you through App Exchange, we need to know ahead of time, when changes are going to occur, whether it's a minor change like a data field is being renamed, or if it's a major change like we're switching to another ERP, and everything is changing. So the more advanced notice you can give us, the better we'll be able to support you and to help you make those changes when the time is right. So I want to make sure that you understand from a transparency point, these are some things to expect. I'm sure Chris might get into this a little bit more in the next part. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Chris and let him take it away from here with the what, as I call it.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucas. As Lucas mentioned, my name is Chris Schloff. I'm the Senior Technical Manager at eBuilder, and my team primarily focuses on the delivery of App Exchange integrations. However, we are also available to consult on our public APIs, things of that nature. But a lot of what we're going to focus on is typically what we would see in an App Exchange delivery. And it's going to hit a lot of points that Lucas has said in terms of preparation, getting stakeholders engaged, doing the planning, and making sure that we've got the elements in place to be able to have a successful integration. So we've talked a lot about, what are the activities that may happen on a project. This is the more definition around kind of what activities actually happen and will make you successful within an integration. So the first activity, as you can see here, are expectations and preparation. And as you can see, there's in parentheses, this session. So before we even get into talking about the scope, talking about schedule, talking about the details of what we're going to deliver, we'll kind of do a preparation session to kind of set the expectations around what we need in order to effectively get started and start digging into the details. Right? A lot of those items are the items that Lucas just covered, right? Have you engaged all of the stakeholders? Are they aware of the goals of what you're trying to accomplish? And all of that actually feeds into activity number 2. Activity number 2 is our customer internal alignment activity, right? And that just gives you an opportunity, and we provide some tools as part of that to guide you through those discussions. Right? Who are the different stakeholders? Like Lucas mentioned, when you're talking about an ERP, right, you're talking about a very disparate group of stakeholders, from IT, from finance, from procurement, from AP, from the business stakeholders that are using the eBuilder application, right? And making sure that all of them are aware of here's what we're trying to do. And not only what we're trying to do from a high level, hey, we want to integrate with our PMIS, but breaking down the details into a business process level, right? The best example that I can give is during this internal alignment activity, the best exercise you can do is to manually recreate whatever process you're planning to have in place with the integration. So let's say you have a one-way integration. It's going to be creating records from your ERP in the eBuilder system, right? The best thing that you can do to define your business process is to walk through each step and say, first, we're going to enter data into our system, and we're going to create a purchase order that's going to be an approved status. Take that same data set that you just entered into your ERP that you're expecting to be sent and integrate to eBuilder, and actually create an associated commitment in the eBuilder system. Right? That'll allow you to define, does this business process make sense? Is this truly what we want to do? What are some of the limiting factors if we go this direction? And that's all part of your internal alignment activity with your internal stakeholders. Right? Once you've gone through that and you've said, okay, here are the business processes and here's where the integrations happen within those business processes, we'll move into what we call our scope validation. Right? Like Lucas mentioned, he and Sergio and the sales team are going to do an excellent job of walking you through the considerations that you need to know of upfront. But the reason we have the internal alignment activity is there's additional pieces that you may not get into the nitty-gritty details during that sales cycle. So what we do is we do our scope validation session based on the information that you come with from the internal alignment activity, just to make sure that, yep, what was sold is exactly what we need to execute. We're in good shape. Don't need to do anything else, right? That just also makes sure that we've defined what we're going to move forward with so that we know what we're planning around, right? If we don't know exactly what we're delivering, it's very hard to put together a schedule that's going to reflect the delivery of those elements. So that's the scope validation. Once we've got that in place, we'll move into our planning and kickoff. And again, this is meeting with all of the relevant stakeholders, putting the schedule out and saying, based on your resource availability across all of these different groups that we're coordinating with, does this schedule make sense? Or are there periods where you know that folks are out on PTO that we need to account for, right? And now we can put together and agree on, yep, this is the schedule that we're gonna move forward with, and we're ready to go to jump into each one of those integrations and actually start delivering the work, right? So integration delivery is going to be comprised of discovery, design, configuration, and testing of the integration points. One of the things that Lucas mentioned, and we'll mention it again here in the risks and successes, is making sure that you all have identified the different scenarios that an integration needs to account for, right? You're going to be extremely intimate with your business process. Oh yeah, when it's this type of PO, we actually handle it differently, and we need the integration to do something accordingly, right? So you're familiar with those scenarios. So during our delivery, we'll be leaning on you to provide those scenarios. And then subsequently during the testing, we'll be looking for you all to be able to stage that data. And this feeds right back into those internal alignment activities, where if you've gone through the process manually prior to saying, yep, this is where we want the data to automatically be sent, so I don't have to do any of this duplicate entry, that's exactly where we want you to be able to stage that data, right? So if you don't have that foundational understanding of where the data is going to live in eBuilder, what it's expected to look like, the discovery and design conversations become very difficult, one, but two, on the testing side of things, when we say, okay, we're ready to test this, go ahead and stage scenarios 1, 2, and 3 so we can run through and validate those, right? If you're not familiar with either one of the systems and the process that you're expecting this to facilitate, the integration can only do so much, right? That's where we run into rework, design revisions, reconfiguration, retesting, and the cycle continues, right? So just making sure that you're prepared from a testing and business process standpoint will pay big dividends as we go through and deliver the integration. Once we've gone through that delivery, we've tested everything, it looks good to go, we'll go into our integration go live readiness, right? So there may be, in some cases, data that we have to, or fields that we have to create in eBuilder in order to accommodate the integration, or vice versa, where we have to create them in your system to facilitate something, right? If there's existing data that's in your system, let's say a good example is a purchase order. If a purchase order already exists on the project as we're developing this integration, and in order for a commit or a purchase order change to be reflected accurately, we now have a new field that we've created on the PO when a change happens. Great, we need to make sure that we go back to all of those entries and make sure that they're updated so that when we turn on the integration, it flows through like we expect it to. So there will be an element of go live readiness where you'll have to go in, make sure all of your data is trued up so that, like Lucas mentioned as well, we reduce those exceptions at go live. Once we've got those activities complete, we've got a date defined for we're going to go ahead and deploy this integration. We'll go ahead and deploy it. You'll see customer sign off, and you'll see within 30 days of go live. So the reason we have the 30-day period is, as Lucas described, we don't want to pull the resources that you've been working with on an ongoing basis to develop this integration as soon as go live happens. We know and are aware that differences in the test environment and the production environment, or data, being missed when it was set up initially, or even things like, oh, we potentially forgot about a requirement that's going to be, critical for one scenario and we didn't account for it, right? We want to make sure we've still got those resources in place for at least 30 days. And that 30-day period typically allows at least one of each type of transaction to be processed. Is it going to hit every scenario? Maybe not. But it at least gives a 30-day period for us to validate that, yes, the majority of everything is working as expected, and we've now validated for the last 30 days that that's the case, right? At that point, we'll then request our sign-off, and we'll move you into our post-enablement support. Our support team is available 24/7, 365. The only difference between our standard support process and when you have an integration in place is simply specifying that you have the integration and which integration you're referring to that may be having a potential issue, right? From that point forward, it gets routed to my team to go in and work with you to get that resolved. So that's from a delivery standpoint. Now, digging a little bit deeper into what really drives the success of that engagement, as well as we'll flip to the next one in here in just a second, are what are some of the risks that can get introduced that may cause delays, missed timelines, missed requirements, things of that nature. So the first piece, success factors. So resource capability and availability is a good one, is a big one. So Lucas mentioned, right, that in cases where you may not have the internal resources that know your internal systems, how to get data in and out of those systems effectively, and you may have to engage third-party resources. We've seen it across the board, have great working relationships with lots of third parties that we've actually worked with across multiple customers. So that's a non-issue, right? But what we want to make sure is before you step to the table and say, yep, we're ready to go, here are the processes and where we want integrations to happen, that you've engaged those third parties. So again, they're aware of what the outcomes are, what we're trying to deliver, and they can be part of that conversation and make sure that they've got the right resources aligned. The second piece to this is if you do use your own internal resources, is that they do have the capability and the availability, right? Availability one is the easier of the two, right? Is this person available to work on this or are they not, right? Very easy to evaluate. Capability is a whole other thing in and of itself, right? We as eBuilder and Trimble employees are extremely familiar with everything from an API, standard import toolkit, the public APIs of what our technology is capable of and what it can and can't do and how it's configured, etc. We have access to those systems, right? When we start talking about the systems that we're integrating with, we're experts in connecting to APIs. We know how to work around network security, right? We know all of these different general elements, but then there are specifics to your system that your team needs to know. How do we get that data in? How do we get that data out? Your specific configuration, just like your eBuilder account, is most likely different than the last customer that we worked with in any given system. So while we have experience with the different systems, your configuration or the methodology that you move forward with is going to be defined based on your capability within your organization or within the third party that you're bringing on. All right, so we lean on them very heavily in order to make the data available to us so that we can do everything from that point forward. All right, so that's resource capability and availability. Second piece is business process decision making. So again, a lot of people think of integrations as technical, and they absolutely are at their very core. However, integrations are not in a bubble, right? They're there to facilitate business processes. So if the outcome is successful, I want the system to do X versus if it's not successful, I want you to send it to this particular step in the process so that this user can review it, right? Again, that's a business decision, not something the technical resources can define for you. So making sure that we have both the business stakeholders able to make those decisions to say, yes, go forward with that solution, as well as the technical resources who can tell us, here's how and what you're actually able to get from the system. All right, the next piece in business processes are that they are defined and they facilitate integration. Right? If the business is saying our business process is going to be A, and then we get on the call and finance is saying, oh, well, no, the business process is the opposite. It starts over here and flows in this direction, right? We're already talking past each other and we're not sure what we actually need to build, right? So again, we will say it a few times throughout this presentation, business process definition is extremely key to a successful integration. Next piece, preparation for testing. Mentioned it on the last slide, defining what those test scenarios are and having those developed for each of your use cases is going to be critical to making sure that the integration does everything you expect it to do. Right? If we're not aware of a scenario, we can't build the requirements or the configuration to handle that scenario. Right? So making sure that you come to the table having thought through the business process. What are the edge cases? What's the typical situation? Do we need to be able to handle this, or does it happen so infrequently that we're going to exclude it from the integration and somebody can handle it manually? Right? So those are the level of detail that we're looking for to be prepared for testing. And then again, you have the right stakeholders engaged to stage the appropriate and accurate test data. Right? We don't want to just shove data in that's not reflective of the real world, and then we get into our testing or out of testing into production, and now the data doesn't flow through because what we tested didn't reflect what actually is going to be the case. And finally, having a defined deployment plan in place will help you be successful. This defines what the cutover date's going to be, as well as any of those migration and true-up activities. So if we need to go back and update any data fields for the integration to work, we've done that on all of the projects we expect this integration to work on. And the last piece is having the resources designated for monitoring the integration post-deployment. So we have a resource around for 30 days that delivered the integration. We would expect the same on your side, because again, integrations are a two-way street. Right? We may find out that, yep, eBuilder sent everything the way that it was required to be sent, but your system is rejecting it because maybe that system wasn't configured. Right? And now we need that team that helped us deliver initially from the other system side of things to now facilitate us fixing that and getting the integration in a stable spot. All right. So lastly, we'll close it out with what are the trends and integrations that cause us to miss schedule and timelines. So the first one is client system configuration constraints. So oftentimes as we're going through integrations, right, we're talking about an accounting system, we're talking about a PMIS, we may have to do configuration in one system or the other to make sure that they can talk to each other effectively, right? Adding a data field here, adding a transformation here, right? And if your system is constrained, right? If you're part of a broader organization, right? And your department specifically is using eBuilder, there may be limitations on what you can and can't do with the system that we're integrating with. So making sure that we've identified that up front and that you've engaged those stakeholders so that if they need to answer any questions on what we can and can't do, that they're available. Again, I'll mention it a second time, resource capability constraints. If you or your resources don't have the capability to say, yep, I know how to get data out of this system reliably based on certain criteria, in order to post it to some external data source, whether that's making it available through an API, or if that's making it available through a flat file through some intermediary SFTP, right? We need to have that capability in place. Otherwise, again, we're going to be struggling to get through the integration. We're not going to be able to figure out your system. We don't have access to your ERP. So that's going to be a huge piece in facilitating the integration. Testing delays. So in addition to having the right stakeholders for staging data, one of the other pieces is just making sure that the sessions are scheduled in advance, right? And we've set the expectations for that session. We're going to test scenarios 1, 2, and 3. We've staged data that's reflective of scenarios 1, 2, 3. We get on the call and we execute those tests, right? What we don't want to see is last-minute testing sessions where people aren't prepared and we don't actually get through the material. And now instead of having a solid meeting to go through and facilitate, we're just having meetings for the sake of meeting, right? We want to avoid that as much as possible. The other piece for testing delays is not having the appropriate parties to pass and fail data. So we've seen in the past where we get different stakeholders show up for the testing and the data flows through based on the requirements and the business process that's been decided on. And now a new resource has questions about why the process is this way, or additional context that they need in order to know whether or not it's actually passing or failing, right? We want to avoid that, and we also want to make sure that you have the right stakeholders, so someone who is going to be executing this and knows what data we're actually looking at can pass or fail that information. Next piece is scope. Again, this is why we have our scope validation. This is so that we can effectively plan and make sure that we're able to stick to a schedule, right, that everybody is agreeable to. So again, we'll just go through our scope validation, make sure we're all on the same page before we move into executing the work so that we don't run into any delays because of scope issues down the line. The last piece is eBuilder system configuration. So while the first piece was client system configuration, the last piece is eBuilder. Design must be complete in order for the integrations to effectively be identified, right? And this comes back to you've gone through the exercise, you know that you're going to start something in eBuilder. Once it gets to a certain point in that process in eBuilder, yep, now is where I want it to integrate. Right? You've already designed that, you've got that in place, and now you're ready to move forward with the integration, right? The second piece to eBuilder system configuration is that the actual configuration elements in the system must be at least 85% complete in order for us to move forward. And this just comes back to, we know there's going to be some elements that we're going to have to account for based on diving into the integration specifically. But the majority of your account should be established and in place so that you know how you're going to be using it, what fields you expect to show up and where. So that when we get into these integration conversations, it's a very simple, yep, this field is missing from this level that we need from the ERP. Let's go ahead and create it so that we can map the data. It shouldn't be, we're not sure exactly how we're going to use eBuilder, so we've only created a couple fields. We may need to create 20 other fields, right? You should be well beyond that point before you're integrating because it's supposed to facilitate your business process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sergio and question and answer.
Thank you, Nick. Excuse me. Thank you, Chris and Lucas. Nick, I was going to turn it over to you for the final couple of questions. By the way, everybody that's on the call, please submit your questions if you've been holding on to them. I know we had 3 immediate ones, Nick, that we wanted to address. But if you are kind enough to stick around, we'll stick around as well. And if there's anything that we need to take offline, we'll do so as well.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. Great job, Lucas and Chris. We are running a little bit over, but we'll try to answer these questions and then get everyone off on their day. So I'll throw this up to either one of you, whoever wants to jump on it. Can you use the import toolkit to update custom data fields on multiple projects at one time?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. Yeah, we do have the capability to import custom fields. And as I said before, you can import those values across multiple projects at the same time. One of the common areas where that typically happens is in what eBuilder is referred to as the project details page. So if you're wanting to import, let's say, for example, construction completion date, which is a date that's typically highlighted in the project details, then you can import that and update that value across hundreds of projects at one time using the import toolkit.
Another import toolkit question. Do we have to import templates? Do we have any import templates available to build from, or do the templates need to be developed from scratch?
The answer to that is yes and no. We do have generic import templates we're happy to provide to anyone upon request. These templates are built on the eBuilder base product, so they don't include any of your custom fields or, for example, your process data fields. However, what I typically advise is the easiest way to create an import template is to create a report that contains the fields that you're looking for and just simply wipe out the data. And then from there, you have a template that already has the native eBuilder field names in it, which makes your mapping process a lot easier.
Awesome. And another import toolkit question. So Lucas, probably right back at you. I got to try to word this in a way that I think is the question. So is the import toolkit able to import information on the line, on the item level, on the line item level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. So, for example, your change orders, or what we call commitment changes in eBuilder, you have commitments and invoices. They all have line items, and yes, you are able to import at the line item level using the toolkit.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions we have right now. Chris, Lucas, anything else you want to add before we wrap up for the day?
No, just one final comment, and I appreciate Chris for all the insight in terms of what the integration process typically looks like. As I said before, we do have customers that have the resources in-house to build their own API calls or at least be able to push and pull flat files of data. The practices that Chris highlighted are lessons learned from an accumulation of 25 years of integrating, not to mention all of the outside experience that our team brings with it too. So, if you're building an integration and you're going to use those in-house resources, I would still follow those same best practices. Having the stakeholder buy-in, making sure that you understand what your test plan is, things like that. All of the things that you saw Chris highlight are good practices to follow, regardless of whether you're leveraging our team to do the integration or if you're working with someone else.
Anything to top that, Chris?
I'll leave it at that. That was a great finishing, but thank you all for joining today. We hope you got something out of it, and if you have any follow-ups, feel free to reach out.
Lucas, Chris, and Sergio's emails are right there on the screen, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. The slides and the presentation video will be sent out to everybody within the next few days, so if you need to send it on, pass it on to somebody else, feel free to do that. You will see that recording in the next handful of days. Thanks everybody for joining. We hope to see you for our next webinar, and have a great rest of your day.